Welcome back. We are so glad to be able to present to you today our third and final panel for our Invest in Health and Wealth North Carolina virtual event. And today's panel's topic is housing stabilization, tips and strategies that will help local residents stay in their home. And I am extremely glad to introduce to you Stella Adams, who will be kicking us off with this particular panel. She will be followed by Jim Savari and then Yolanda Taylor. If you have any questions that you want to begin to raise in this particular panel discussion, you will see a Q&A box immediately to the right of your screen. You can put your question in there and we'll get to those questions at the end of the panelist presentation as time permits. So with that, Stella, take it away.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the final day of the Health and Wealth Invest in Health and Wealth Conference. Today, we're talking about stabilizing housing in underserved communities while fighting a pandemic. And this is an area that really needs our attention. We have two astounding panelists, Jim Svara, who is from Durham, North Carolina, and is part of the Coalition for Affordable Housing and Transit. And we have Yolanda Taylor, who's with Legal Aid of North Carolina, but she is a community lawyer and a community activist, and she's going to bring that perspective to what we're doing. I want to give you, though, a broader understanding of what we are experiencing, not just here in Durham or here in North Carolina, but what we're experiencing across the country as it comes to some of these some of the pressures that are on our underserved communities. So with that, I'm going to just again, I hope you can see my screen. I'm going to talk about a couple of studies that were done by the Federal Reserve Banks. And the first one is related to Jim's article. And the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis did a study that found that minority homeowners face higher tax assessments rates than whites. And it does say that there's a fix that's available. What they found in their study was that Black and Hispanic homeowners face property tax assessment rates that are 10 to 13% higher than non-minority homeowners in the same tax jurisdiction. Jim is going to share with you that in Durham, that was a far higher percentage than that facing many of our neighborhoods. They also found that minority homeowners are less likely to appeal assessments than non-minorities. And when they do appeal, they tend to win less often. And if they do win, they win less financial relief than non-minority owners. This is a federal study, so wherever you are, this issue is an issue that minority homeowners face. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about a Fed study around what is going on as it relates to the homeowners, low-income renters and homeowners. First, we find that our housing counseling agencies are being overwhelmed with requests for counseling service, both on rent relief as well as on homeowners relief, without proper funding. The federal rental relief dispersal has been slow and uneven, and nonprofits are only able to fill part of this gap. They don't have the manpower, they don't have the resources. Affordable housing providers face many challenges, and the CARES Act has not been able to assist them. When you can't collect the rents on, we're already operating the developers on margins that are very thin to try to keep the affordability. And this has been an extra burden. So low income homeowners sought information about forbearance, but they didn't go through the counseling system to understand the consequences of forbearance if you don't do a loan modification in there. So these are some of the things that are facing our communities, the issues facing small landlords, their issues. There's a need for information and counseling resources. These are the findings of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. And so this is the background behind our discussion today. And these two people, Jim Svara and Yolanda Taylor, are heroes on the battlefield, fighting for our low-income families that are homeowners and our low-income families that are facing the many challenges that COVID has presented as it relates to housing. And with that, I am proud to turn this over to my personal hero, who has saved, whose program is saving thousands of low-income homeowners and preventing the total gentrification of Durham, Jim Svara.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here as part of this discussion. And I think we are we here, share the screen? There we. Is the screen appearing yet? Okay, and slideshow and Zoom slideshow. Okay, what I'm going to talk about, thanks to Stella for introduction, is a program a proposal we developed in Durham called the Long-Time Low-Income Homeowner Property Tax Assistance Grant Program. But I'm also going to look at some other options so that you're aware of what's available and is being discussed in North Carolina generally. The purpose of the program is to relieve the increasing tax burden that Stella talked about. Here and in cities across the country, tax values and property taxes are rising, but incomes for many families are not. This can lead to displacement of longtime homeowners and the destabilization of their neighborhoods. So what we're concerned about is both preserving affordable housing and also promoting neighborhood stability by finding a way to provide help in covering this increasing tax bill that people have to pay. What's been happening with property values? Well, here's a graph that shows changing property values in certain neighborhoods in Durham. Durham had not had a reassessment of property values since 2008 in 2016. And then they've changed their policy to go to reassessment every 3 years. So we have new property values in both 2016 and 2019. The figures on the far left for the county show that overall there was a 13% increase in property values, residential values in 2016, and then a 27% increase in 2019. Then you see 5 neighborhoods around the city. In 2 of them, Bragtown and Haytide, there wasn't much initial change, but then in the 2019 assessment, there was a big boost. In the other 3 neighborhoods, there were substantial increases in both years. And so you can see that now low-income homeowners or homeowners in low-income neighborhoods are paying proportionately more in taxes than in the rest of the county. Another important area is the quadrant of the city, northeast central Durham. And there we see a slightly different pattern. You see the county average again. It makes a difference how close these neighborhoods are to downtown Durham. In 2 of the block groups from this area are within a mile of downtown, and you can see they've had those big boosts in property values in both 2016 and 2019. As you move farther away from the center of the city, there was not much change in 2016, but gentrification is spreading. As homes are being acquired, new homes are being built, and pushing up the average tax value in houses generally in the neighborhood. Let's take a simple example. A house that was appraised at $70,000 in 2008. If there was a 40% increase, its value would have gone up to $101,000 in 2016. Another 40% increase boosts it to over $141,000 in 2019. That means a tax bill of $1,764 in Durham at the present time for a two-person household with an income of just over $20,000, which would be 30% of the area median income. This tax bill represents 9% of their income for property tax alone, even before the other housing expenses. Now, there are two state programs that are in place that are restricted to seniors and handicapped homeowners. This is the Homestead Exemption Program reduces the assessed value of the property by $25,000 or 50%, whichever is greater. This is for households with income of $31,000 or less. The state circuit breaker program has a wider eligibility level, 5-year residency requirement. For incomes up to $31,000, the tax payment is limited to 4% of income, and up to $46,500, the tax payment is limited to 5% of the household income. A key feature of this program is that only the last 3 years of the taxes that have been deferred, that is the amount above the percent of income limit, those get postponed, and only the last 3 years of deferred taxes with interest have to be repaid if the property changes hands. There are two local tax assistance programs in place in North Carolina. Durham City has had a program which will be going one more year and then ending, which covers the increase in property tax being paid starting in 2016 compared to what they paid in 2015. And that goes up to 80% AMI income limit. It was limited to 3 neighborhoods that have been redevelopment targeted, community development target areas with additional complications. You had to be real close to a city investment. And there has been not much participation in this program. It's ending this year. Charlotte has a program targeted on elderly and aging in place program, which has also permits more people to be involved and pays the difference in their tax rate. Now, one important thing about these examples is that they show that tax assistance programs can be legally run in North Carolina. The tax assistance grant proposal that we developed in Durham and was supported by a broad coalition that I'll show you in a moment would provide help to households with incomes less than up to 30% AMI anywhere in the county. Census data shows that there are over 4,000 owner-occupied households at this income level. We want to make sure that the aid is going to longtime homeowners rather than people that have moved in recently, and that can pass on to their heirs as well. The amount of property tax that would have been paid under this proposal was limited to 1% of income. So for that household we talked about before, they would pay $204 rather than $1,764. There was very broad community support. The lead organizations are listed there on top, and then other organizations involved in housing, as well as neighborhood groups. We had strong support from the city council, who indicated that they would support this program, and we got indication that this would be a legal program from the School of Government experts, as well as looking at the experience in Durham City and Charlotte. But the county administration and tax and legal office told the commissioners that this was not legal in North Carolina, or there were questions about its illegality. And if the commissioners gave away tax money, they would be personally liable to repay them. And the county commission would not support the proposal. They asked the tax administrator to develop an alternative, and what the tax administration office came up with was a deferred payment program with some elements similar to the circuit breaker program. It was supported by the commission and reluctantly supported by the council because that was the only option available this time. The long-term deferral program, it's limited, same income limit. 4% of income has to be paid. So that household we've talked about will have to pay $815 of their tax bill. If the house is sold, the full amount of deferred payments and interest at 9% have to be repaid. Or after 10 years, the owner, if they're still in the house, have to start paying back the deferred payments 1 year at a time, as well as paying their current tax bill. There are some efforts on the part of the county to get contributions to help cover the interest costs, but it's not clear that that's going to be successful. In terms of future steps, we hope that we can work with 2 new commissioners that are coming in office in December and still move back to the tax grant next year. We also are going to look at the state legislature after the election to see if there's receptivity to either giving local governments the option of removing the age requirement for the circuit breaker program, again, with only last 3 years of tax deferments having to be repaid, or to clarify that local governments can provide tax assistance. We'd also like to include incomes up to 60% of AMI and homeowners who have gotten their houses from Habitat for Humanity. What we need to do now is to get everybody who's been involved so far involved in outreach to let homeowners know that this program is available and help them prepare their applications so that they can get some immediate relief. So that's where we are now, and look forward to questions and comments.
Thank you, Jim. We really appreciate that. And again, if you're in Charlotte, this is an outreach event for Charlotte and Durham. You need to let people know, and statewide as well. You need to let people know that these programs exist and that they have until December 31st to request a deferment, to request an abatement under the seniors and handicap program, and the deferment if they don't meet those requirements. But we really need to make sure that we let people know that these programs exist, that there's a statewide exemption for seniors and handicapped persons that allow them to cut their tax bill by up to 50% if they meet the eligibility requirements. 50%, that's good money saved for our seniors, and it helps preserve housing. I'm really proud and excited to introduce to you our community lawyer and community warrior. They say that she's like Stella on steroids. So I'm happy to know the legacy continues. I'm proud to introduce Yolanda Taylor.
Thank you, Stella. And we gotta continue the legacy. And I hope you guys can hear me. You know, we're all working from home, homeschooling is going on. Hopefully my internet will not be unstable, but I'm going to show real briefly my PowerPoint. I'm gonna share it. And I want you guys to let me know if you're able to see it. Hold on, let's see here. Can y'all see that? All right. Okay, so as Stella mentioned, I am a attorney at Legal Aid, and I do what you call community-based lawyering. I represent community groups that are organized and that are mainly, most of my groups are fighting the same issue, which is gentrification, the lack of affordable housing, and are pushing for equitable policies at their local level as it relates to housing and anti-gentrification mitigation strategies. So again, I basically just explained what community lawyering is. We provide clients with sustainable knowledge that allows them to build sustainable change in their own neighborhoods. And we assist them in identifying what structural barriers exist in their communities. And then we help them build capacity within their own communities to take action. Legal aid, the organization I'm with, cannot organize, but we can identify groups that are already organized and support them with our legal work. So I practice mainly in community economic development law, affordable housing. I want to talk about, the intersection of health and housing. Since that's the topic today, we know that today's challenges lay at the intersection of race and gender as well. Before the pandemic, there was a poor Black women, were evicted at alarming rates, setting off a chain of hardship. If you have not read the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond, I will ask that you read that, and you will learn, if you don't already do, that, oftentimes evictions lead to poverty versus the other way around. And before the pandemic, Black women and their children were disproportionately being evicted at higher alarming rates. So even now during the pandemic, this is another headline showing that this wave of mass evictions that's being held back, but it still is a tidal wave ready to burst open, but various orders at the local level, and now through the federal CDC's eviction moratorium, is just basically holding off the inevitable if people are unable to access important rental assistance or utility assistance. Again, this wave of mass evictions is inevitable, and Black women and their children will be hit the hardest. So, and not just Black women, we know it's people of color, Black, Latino, and Indigenous people. Why? Because of the sharp inequities that we see in education, employment, housing, healthcare, stemming in large part from systemic racism. These households are particularly hardest hit. And we know that Congress, in the beginning of the pandemic, did many things to limit or place a ban on evictions through their coronavirus aid, relief, and economic security, known as the CARES Act in March. But that moratorium has expired. So the only eviction ban that we have in place now is currently the CDC eviction moratorium, which is very confusing. There's a lot of litigation going on. Judges are asking us lawyers to brief and provide legal research regarding the constitutionality of the CDC eviction moratorium, its applicability, and its enforceability in North Carolina. And the landlord plaintiff bar is aggressively representing their clients, and we find ourselves, in court on emergency actions, trying to put in place temporary restraining orders that would, and in the process of doing that, educating the judge and the court why the CDC eviction moratoriums apply to our clients. So even though that eviction moratorium is in place, there are landlords still pursuing eviction actions. Their lawyers are arguing that they have the right to do so, and there are sheriffs still executing writs. But when we look at, the economic impact of this pandemic, this is a recent article from October 6th. It says that in North Carolina, there was 2.49 million unemployment claims. It's my understanding that there's still a bottleneck of about 20,000 claims that have not been resolved. And when you're looking at this huge number of 2.49 million, keep in mind, all these claims were not deemed eligible. So there are a lot of people who didn't even get it. And these challenges that we're seeing nationally, that we're seeing statewide, are in fact community challenges. So my role as a community lawyer is to get beside communities and help them figure out solutions to attack or meet these challenges. So I want to lift up some models of community clients that I represent or that I'm actually involved in. And one is neighboring to Durham, Raleigh. I became, as a private citizen, not as a legal aid lawyer, involved with the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition. And the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition has been pushing the city of Raleigh to do an affordable housing bond, just like Durham. I enjoy hearing what Stella and Svara had to state about, all the different programs and creative solutions that they came up with in order to ensure that those with the greatest need can access affordable housing. But this group is made up of various organizations consistent of impacted people, residents, and people of color, and most importantly, their allies as well. So we, of course, are not just advocating for a meaningful, affordable housing bond, but we're advocating in general for affordable housing that meets the stated need for, that meets the greatest stated need for housing in Raleigh's consolidated plan. And we're also looking at fair housing issues as well. So that's why Stella says I'm 0.20, I guess, because she's a fair housing legend. So we are also fighting for fair housing, and we're also lifting up a framework of equitable economic development through the use of land use strategies. And there are some talks about reparations and restorative economics. So what do we do? As a private citizen, but using my lawyering skills, I help the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition author a lengthy letter to Raleigh City Council recommending that the bond be used primarily for those living at 30% and below a Raleigh's area median income. And those are working people and those who need housing vouchers. But it's a household of four making an annual salary of around $27,800 a year in Raleigh. And the reason for that push, that this money is dedicated primarily to this income population, is because we know that these are the same essential workers that we all realize were needed in order to re-stimulate our economy. And we know that these are essential workers that really never stopped working during the pandemic. And essential workers are needed for any healthy economy, and they should be able to live in the cities where they work. And of course, gentrification, and this is a real picture of Raleigh. You see this Black man on a bicycle. I don't know if he's doing it for recreation or if that's his only means of transportation, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's his only means of transportation, because we know that before gentrification occurred in downtown and Southeast Raleigh, that this community laid disinvested for decades. And we know years of redlining. And when I began as a lawyer at Legal Aid, we were in the middle of a foreclosure crisis that I feel laid the foundation for what's occurring now, which is robust development. So Raleigh stated itself in its consolidated plan, which is this fair housing document, that the primary housing challenge for Raleigh's low and moderate income residents is housing costs. And we know that housing sits at a core of a system of multiple institutions that reproduce inequities. And we know that housing and health are connected, because where you live matters. Where you live determines whether or not you have access to groceries. Where you live determines whether or not you have parks and things that you can take advantage of. Unfortunately, these parks and these bikeways and these pathways only are created in low wealth and Black and brown communities when there's robust development and when there's gentrification. But Raleigh itself is admitting that these luxury renters and these developers continue to acquire older, modest private sector rental communities throughout the city to redevelop as upscale apartments, and that this is contributing to affordable, it removes naturally occurring affordable units and contributes to the upward pressure on rents. So we're, the Wake County Housing Justice Coalition is working on that campaign, and again, are using Raleigh's own words to say this is why the bond needs to go towards those who are very low income at 50% of the AMI, but the coalition finally settled on supporting a bond that actually helps those extremely low income households, making around $25,000 annually for a family of four. So this is just some recent steps, you know, advocacy. They've spoken out at the council meetings. They did a lengthy letter. We've had some Zoom meetings on social media where the coalition itself has initiated its own campaign to educate voters about what the bond says, what it will do, who it will help, and how many units of affordable housing it will produce. And so moving on east to one of my favorite towns, Rocky Mount. I want to lift Rocky Mount up. It's a very active community of residents, mostly seniors that we represent. That group in Rocky Mount is called the Community Academy. These are some signs that they made. They actually had a community protest, if that's what you want to call it, but it seemed like it was more like a a parade because we have music. And they were just basically talking about, their desire to see their communities improve, but be improved in an equitable fashion. Gentrification has not happened yet in Rocky Mount, but they are smart enough to see the writing on the wall from looking at Durham and Raleigh, and they understand that the affordable housing crisis in Raleigh and Durham is pushing out east. There are bedroom communities to the Triangle, and a lot of commuters from the Triangle already, go back and forth to Rocky Mount. So they're making sure that as development is beginning to increase in Rocky Mount, that they're being intentional with their strategies and that they're already putting in place efforts to create and preserve affordable housing as the community develops. So they're very organized. And one thing that they did as it relates to health, and health is a main focus too, as well as housing, they recently received a grant from Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation to center community input around health. So the community working on policies and recommendations to the city will also shift the way their healthcare providers actually address their health needs. The health needs will be based on what the community says it needs in order to remain healthy. And they lifted up racial housing segregation as a social determinant of health, or a situation in their community that's making them unhealthy. And they're tying racial housing segregation to high cases of obesity, diabetes, and hypertension. So that was Rocky Mount. And another thing in Rocky Mount, because of COVID, is that, in all communities, is that we know utility bills, are also like up in the millions of dollars. As of July 2020, it was $218 million in utility payments where people were behind. And this number probably has increased. We do have some monies on the table now from our state government and from our federal government to address utility assistance. But what I'm seeing on the ground is that it's still hard to tap into this important assistance. There's a lot of red tape, and there are a lot of things that seem to screen you out versus screen you in for this important rental and utility assistance. I'm trying to look at my time, okay. So that's just talking again. This is in another small town. Well, the city of Rocky Mount, actually, their utility bills had topped $900,000 in this small town during the pandemic. This is just a letter in which we wrote on behalf of the community group saying that the city should use CDBG COVID funds to support utility assistance and rental assistance. And this is a letter to me from the city of Rocky Mount basically saying we will do that. So the community push and community involvement in a way that's important, CARES Act funding is used locally, actually led to the city agreeing to use those funds to help as it relates to rental assistance and utility assistance. So this is local funding in addition to the statewide funding for utility and rental assistance. And the last group I'm gonna lift up that I represent is in Wilson. It's called the Change Coalition. And the Change Coalition was created out of the protests, around the world and statewide when George Floyd died because of that one knee to his neck. Well, we know that, and I'm gonna quote Nancy Pelosi, she stated shortly thereafter George Floyd's death that one knee to the neck opened up a tinderbox of inequities to address, one being housing. So they have moved from protests to policy, and they have recommendations on the table to their city leaders because they want to reimagine their communities. They want to look at the way, investment is being done locally in Wilson, and they're trying to drive investment in their community, which is racially segregated, heavily segregated, dilapidated buildings, abandoned lots, under-resourced schools. It's a food desert zone. The parks lay unattended. Their historic cemetery where enslaved people are buried lays unkept. So there's a lot of systemic issues there, and they are organized, and legal aid is supporting them. And this is a copy of the letter that was sent to the office of the city manager and copied to various people. But again, they're trying to promote economic development in their communities. And they want to sit at the table, and then eventually, like Rocky Mount, the table will be their table and others will be invited to come and sit. So that's the goal there. So those are the communities that I represent. And again, all of these issues around housing and affordable housing intersect health heavily. And so this is something that's definitely important. This is something that they're working on, and they are empowered to improve the health of their communities. And that's my contact information. Thank you. And if anyone has any questions, I don't know, I think we're holding questions to the end, and maybe I am the end.
I want to thank you, Yolanda, for that excellent presentation. And again, showing people the difference between Jim and Yolanda. You saw how when community comes together, when we organize together, when we partner together, we can create change. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. We want to have some, if there are any questions, put them in the chat room or in the Q&A room, and and Kevin will bring them to our attention. I want to say to you that North Carolina has tools. We have tools, and we have people who will help you use those tools. But as Yolanda says, she can't help you if you're not organized. You got to organize, you got to be a coalition, you got to be a group. And then she can step in and help you with the knowledge and the tools that she has. Jim Svara is part of an organization, the Coalition for Affordable Housing and Transit. Don't forget the transit part and how it bisects, trisects, and dissects our communities, and what that role is in keeping us segregated and keeping us locked out of opportunity. And so remember, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin for final words, but I just want you to know that we have the tools, we have the opportunity, we just need to organize and use them. Kevin, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Yolanda, for that great discussion. I don't see any questions or in the chat as of right now. So if you do have a question, you can post it in the chat. But what I'm going to do right now is begin to kind of wrap us up with a few closing remarks, since this will be the last time we come together in our general session, with this being the third and final day of the event. I first want to thank all of our keynote speakers. Special thanks to both John Taylor, Jesse Van Tol, and Irv Henderson, who represented NCRC during the welcome addresses, as well as Dr. John Lumpkin, William Bynum, and Pamela Weidman, who delivered our keynote sessions each morning. Special thanks to all of our panelists who did an outstanding job in your panelist presentations. We realize and recognize that all of you could have been keynote speakers, but you gave informative content, very rich content, and for that, we're extremely grateful. Special thanks to each of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules. We know that so many of us are Zoomed out, and some people say in another Zoom meeting, but you took time out of your busy schedules to participate in this 3-day virtual event. And so we definitely want to thank each and every one of you for making this event what it is. I've already heard about the number of conversations and discussions that have begun to take place. And so I want to thank each and every one of you. And then I also want to thank our co-conveners, without of whom this would not be possible. Special thanks to each and every one of our co-conveners, Stella Adams in Consulting, of Irving Henderson Enterprises, the 20 Community Link, as well as Reinvestment Partners. Without these 5 co-conveners, this event would not have been possible. We've had weekly planning calls leading up to this particular event. And I want to thank each and every one of our co-conveners for doing everything that they did to make this particular event a reality. Special thanks to the NCRC staff, some of whom have already been mentioned. It's a Herculean effort pulling all of these particular pieces together, from the comms team to the graphics team to the conference and events team and the membership team. So many people work together to make this particular event a reality, and I want to thank each and every one of them. Last but not least, I want to do a special piece for those of you who may not be familiar with NCRC. I want to let you know 2 things. The first thing I want you to know is that NCRC is a grassroots coalition that advocates on behalf of low and moderate income communities. And we would love for you to become a part of the NCRC family. So there's going to be someone from the membership and events team reaching out to you shortly after this particular session and letting you know how you could become officially a part of the NCRC family. I strongly encourage you to join. NCRC is a great organization. We would love to have you as part of the fold. The second thing that I want to let you know, and Irv Henderson indicated this in his opening welcome address, is that we will be having follow-up regional meetings in targeted geographies in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So please look out for your emails. Those communications are going to come through the co-conveners, letting you know how we're going to begin to mobilize and organize individuals as we get ready for the work moving forward. We like to say that this particular event is not the climax, but it's just the starting line to the work that we're going to begin to do in North Carolina. Lastly, I want to get us ready for our upcoming special breakout session. To join the special group discussion, go to the networking module on the left side of your screen, select groups, and then select the table that you would like to participate in. The tables are divided by region, and we'll add additional tables if needed. And as the last 2 days, the process is the same for today. We want you to focus in on 3 questions. The first question being, what are your key takeaways that you got from today, either through the presentation by Pamela Weidman or the presentation by our panelists today? Second, what information or activities can you begin to immediately apply to your work? Because it was our objective to make sure that the information presented would be able to be immediately applied for you the very next day at your respective places of activity. And then the third piece is, what are the top 2 or 3 campaign priorities that you would like to see us begin to engage in coming out of today? So with that, I still don't see any questions or answers in the Q&A box. And so I want to turn it over to Stella Adams to see if she has any parting words before our dismisses to get ready for our breakout session.
Thank you, Kevin. I just want to reiterate, if you're not a member of NCRC, join. I want to thank my panelists, Jim Svara and Yolanda Taylor, once again for all that they have done. I want to thank you all for participating. Y'all were a little quiet, but you did participate. There is Renee has a question. Renee Price has a question in the chat box. Kevin, if you can see it, I don't. So if you would respond to her question or share her question. I also want to say, though, that there are a lot of that CRA offers us a lot of opportunities. I urge you to go to the Business Roundtable website today. They have announced their plan related to race and equity. They have committed $30 billion to build 200 affordable housing units over the next 5 years. They have committed $1 billion to supporting minority banks. They have committed money to support minority small businesses. And so those are commitments that's pinned on paper, that's not actualized. We are fortunate in North Carolina that a lot of Business Roundtable companies are headquartered here. So their commitment needs to be here. And so I urge you to take that as one of the opportunities we have to organize around once we get together in these cohorts over the next 3 weeks. We have targets, they have commitments, we have the opportunity to organize. And again, we need this opportunity to organize around these CRA and fair housing and fair lending issues. We know that January is going to be a rough month for our people. And so we don't need to be sitting around waiting till the disaster comes, when there are ways that we can mitigate that in the housing area. We can do the outreach that Jim talked about to let inform low-income homeowners that they qualify for these benefits to help keep them in their housing. We can notify renters of the different assistance programs and get them signed up. Most of these things, the victim of the disaster has to proactively request. It's not something that the landlord's going to tell them about. It's not something that the lender's going to tell them about. That means we as a community have to do the outreach, and we have to assist the borrowers and the renters in getting the services and benefits that have been allocated for them.
Stella,
So
I think that's a good segue into the question that the questioner has. And I'm going to ask you all to respond briefly because we're almost at time. So if you could just take each 20 to 30 seconds to answer this question. And the question is, what policies do we want our state legislators to enact?
Jim?
Well, I think to address the issues that have come up here, let's make it clear that local governments can provide assistance to low-income homeowners to help them stay in their homes.
Yolanda?
I mean, of course, I would like to see more significant investments from our state government as it relates to affordable housing. And I would also like to see more flexibility, because a lot of cities are afraid to use certain zoning tools like inclusionary zoning because they're weary that, and there's, you know, conflicting case law, but because it's not specifically listed as a zoning tool, a price point or affordability isn't specifically listed as a zoning tool under North Carolina law. A lot of municipalities are afraid to use inclusionary zoning. And just from looking at models in other states, inclusionary zoning is a great way for cities to actually incentivize developers to build affordable housing. So I would like to see some changes, I guess, on the state level as it relates to zoning tools and what municipalities can do. And to look at cities like Durham and Raleigh that are gentrifying and that have higher affordable housing crises occurring. You know, I know certain municipalities have certain special ordinances. So if you're looking at a city like Durham or Raleigh, and like I said, that their lack of affordable housing units is higher than anywhere else in the state, then why not, you know, allow them to maybe have a special ordinance if you don't want to make it a statewide law as it relates to inclusionary zoning.
And I guess I would like to see programs that we know have worked reinstated. I'd like to see the North Carolina Foreclosure Assistance Program reinstated. I'd like to see the Housing Counseling Grant Program and payment program for providing services to people facing foreclosure and facing rental displacement. I'd like to see those funds and programs that were designed for the 2008 crisis to be put in place, reinstated and put in place, so we have the nonprofit capacity that we need to be able to do the job. There's a lot we could put on the housing agenda and developing a housing policy agenda if we sit down and think about what we need and what we know we already have. We've been there and done that on a lot of this before, and we need to build on that and create a better opportunity for folks and sustainable, so the program doesn't end when the problem ends, because it's only a temporary problem. We need to keep those resources in place. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Yolanda. Thank each and every one of you. This has been an awesome 3 days. Don't forget, we're going to break away from here, but please meet us in a breakout session so that the discussion can continue. Those particular pieces are very important because that's where the strategizing and the real work begins. So until next time, we're grateful to each and every one of you. Take care.